Start. Again, just good afternoon to everybody. We have a good turnout. Again, we have like 26 so far signed up. We'll probably get a few more, and again, I did not read these 220 pages. I have no idea, in detail. I'm going to look to everybody on this call to kind of pick up where we left off on, I guess, was last Wednesday at our EBC meeting to kind of nail down some of the issues a little bit in more detail. So let's just start with, and I'm looking at a David Morris, I'm looking at George Berkowitz, I see Jeff Fenton is on camera, Michelle, Dennis McCullough. Where do we want to start with? I see Chris Kulik's too joined us. Chris, good to see you. In terms of, maybe we could prioritize it in terms of some of the bigger issues. I did hear last week that one of the issues was, now if you're at a site and you're doing your due diligence and you discover contamination, that you have to report it. So I'm going to open it up, unless Tim or anybody else, you have a certain way you want to run today.
Tony, this is George. I just want to jump in real quickly because I thought Rob did a really good job, but he did correct himself. Reporting discharges no longer is constrained by the fact that you're doing AAI. It is any person who has knowledge of a discharge has an obligation to report to the department. And it's beyond the LSRPs. I mean, initially, the first portion of it sounds like it's just the AAI. It's not. It's way beyond the AAI. So I think that's a primary concern.
Hold on for a second, George. Not sure what the heck that was.
I like to hear myself speak, so I recorded it and just kept on playing it over and over.
I guess if everybody could put themselves on mute.
And I said it, and I'm going to put myself on mute. That was my primary concern.
Oh, George, well, before you go, George, hold on. Yeah. Because again, I want to take notes here, but so just go into a little bit more detail what we talked about last week and what the outcome was.
Well, I mean, Rob did a really good job talking about the notification issue. And Rob did a really good job running through everything else. We spent the majority amount of our time, however, talking about notification because it's very far reaching. It goes way beyond the LSRP community. It goes way beyond environmental consultants. It goes to every person in the state of New Jersey who has knowledge of a discharge has an obligation to report that to the department. Now, the question is, what is knowledge? And that's a very good question. Some things will be empirical. Like if you see a rupture, if you see an overturned vehicle, you see gasoline spilling into a creek. It smells like gasoline. It looks like gasoline. It tastes like gasoline. It's gasoline. Theoretically, if you're the person behind that accident, theoretically, there could be an obligation of you to report that. That's how far reaching this is. It's no longer just constrained to the LSRP community or AAI community. So I think that has a very chilling effect on a lot of different people. The AAI has a lot of different effects.
What is AAI? I'm sorry.
All appropriate inquiry. I'm sorry. All appropriate inquiry. Due diligence. Synonymous phrases.
Okay.
So at any rate, all appropriate inquiry, it goes way beyond the wonderful world of all appropriate inquiry when people are doing an investigation to see what kind of condition sites are before they purchase them. This goes all to anything, anytime, anywhere.
Thank you, George.
Okay.
I guess, Ray, you had a point.
Just a question on that. And I admit I have not gone through the regs yet either. That's I'm starting now. I have a couple of days to hopefully get there. But George, from a legal perspective, I understand how an LSRP may have an obligation because they're regulated. I understand how a person anywhere responsible may have an obligation because they have liability. But to say anybody has an obligation, what would be the DEP's jurisdiction on anyone else?
And the answer to your question is that it's in the regulation. It says person, and person is described in Sarah. So it's an individual. So it does have potential legal standings. Persons is described as just about anybody.
Yeah, I mean, and to answer your question, I mean, there's in here there are some rule changes which are kind of like housekeeping, and they're small items which I don't think that a lot of the kind of the non-technical, non-practitioners would be concerned about, you know, from the EBC side. There are for the practitioner side, there's a lot more details or additional requirements being placed upon us, which, you know, I'm not too happy about, but I'm not sure whether we can do anything about them. But really, yeah, this idea that this, you know, during the SARA 2.0, when we were all engaged in it and sitting across the room and in those stakeholder breakout groups, you know, this idea that we knew that at the time, Mr. Peterson really believed that doing phase ones was remediation because the tasks that the practitioners were doing were identical. The report looked slightly different, and there was a slight different emphasis on the report, but nothing came into SARA 2.0 which mentioned spill discharge reporting at all. In fact, there was that last floor amendment which actually gave you a roadmap of an explanation to the public how when they don't need to use an LSRP. So to really, you know, Tony, you know, this discharge reporting obligation is the big one for the EBC and the CIA.
Yeah.
You know, outside of anything else, because, you know, I was talking to an environmental attorney about this as well, because, you know, I too was coming like, you know, if truly these rule amendments are due to SARA 2.0 being passed, this was not in SARA 2.0 about this obligation. It was specifically outside of it. So everyone's mentioning whether this exceeds statutory authority in this requirement, but I don't know. I mean, the DEP have the ability to write, you know, to do minor housekeeping, and they've done that on every rule amendment that they've done. So it's the big fight is the thing that was kind of kept out of the room at the end of it.
Yeah, let me just read from the introduction. It says finally through the NJAC 7:26-C 22.4C, the department maintains that whenever a person obtains specific knowledge of a discharge, then the person is obligated to notify the department of the discharge, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what is specific knowledge? If in fact you have data that's quality, here's my take on it. As an LSRP or as a technical person, if you don't have relative to discharges of contamination, that there is quality assured data, my position would be it's not necessarily data until it's quality assured data. That doesn't get through to these empirical issues where you have these overturned vehicles or you see a tank rupture or so forth and so on. To me, the conglomeration of your senses and sensory perception of that type of situation would constitute knowledge of a discharge. I think that's going to be debated.
Yeah, can I ask something, George? Because the one part that I did read was, I guess, the upfront over summary. They're saying that they had a stakeholder process on this, but this issue never came up during the stakeholder process. I know we were represented by some of our members, so I wasn't there. But did anybody have this discussion? I guess June 2023.
I was not part of the stakeholder process. I can't answer that.
Okay. Anybody?
Yeah, I was. Sorry, I know, Michelle, I see your hand up. But yeah, I mean, there were breakout sessions talking about this because I was participating in that when I was sitting across the table from, you know, an interested real estate broker, and they were asserting that they should have the ability to sample and to perform soil sampling and analysis on their own properties without doing anything, obviously without using an LSRP. But yeah, there was discussions about this, but nothing really came of it, and it didn't show up in, you know, in the final act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michelle, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
That's okay. I just wanted to make a notation because I think we talked about it at EBC, but more specifically, and I think maybe George touched upon it when he just read that excerpt there, is the definition of knowledge, right? And just for simplicity, I mean, here at the higher level for LSRPs, but just in general or a generic sense of like knowledge. So there'd be plenty of property owners or people that work on properties or for companies that may have a knowledge of a spill or a
Mhm.
discharge or an issue. Like I think it's too broad. It needs to be defined. And moreover, it could be very, it could be it could potentially become a huge impact depending on who they think a person would be defined as, and also the definition of knowledge, I think needs to be clarified.
But so and again, maybe George or somebody, when they say specific knowledge of the contamination, the spill, or which is it?
A discharge, which means a release to the environment. Not just a spill, not just a release, but a release to, I'm sorry, a discharge is a release to the environment of the waters and the soil of the state of New Jersey.
And it doesn't say that exceeds standards.
Not at that point. The point is, we'll figure that out later.
Okay, gotcha. All right, Kathy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, just one, I was expecting this, but I think that was because I was part of the stakeholdering process during the board rules and for the licensing board, and I got this. I had a sense that this was going to be in there. I was surprised at what they said, but I'm not surprised to see it there. So I feel like I had an inkling it was coming. I was expecting it to be much more narrow. And then the other thing, to Michelle's point about, who has an obligation. I mean, right now, a property owner would have an obligation already. If they have knowledge of a discharge on their site, they already have that obligation, Michelle. Now, whether, is it your operator or is it the person that owns the site, that might be different. But a property owner, a property operator already has that obligation.
All right. Anything else on this topic?
George is right. I didn't see any hands up, so I just jumped in. I'm sorry. George, I never thought I'd say this, but you are right.
About time you came to realize that, Jeff.
It only took me 20 years, but plus the 12 at work for you. Yeah, George, you're 100% right. To Michelle's comment, I don't know if we want further clarification of knowledge, because as LSRPs, I thought about this a lot over the years, ever since. I mean, we used to deal with discharge. We've dealt with this for so long. What's a discharge, right? It used to be, if I have an impact to groundwater exceedance, is that a discharge? Probably not. If I have a migration to groundwater exceedance, do I have a discharge? Well, probably. It's a standard now. Do I have knowledge about where it was collected? Knowledge about how it was collected? Who collected it? What does a chain look like? Was it cold or warm when it got there? Do I have information on conformance? Was it validated? Like, any person cannot report a discharge unless they see, like George said, with a gasoline going into a stream. It's just ludicrous. And from my perspective, I'm actually quite comfortable. Well, I don't like the whole rule. That's a whole other issue with due diligence. But in terms of having knowledge, if I see a data point on a page, like let's say you're a paralegal and you're reviewing a report for a law firm, and you see a data point on a page and it says benzene above direct contact, right? Is that a discharge? Well, it's a data point on it's on a page. How is it transcribed? Is it even correct? We can go on and on and on and on. Is that really specific knowledge? I argue no, absolutely not. An attorney said last week, what about old cases where there was a discharge and nobody reported it? What if I know about it? Not specific knowledge. I think you've got to really have information. Like when I collect a sample and I know who did it and how it was collected and I was directing it, that's specific knowledge. So I think, I don't know that we want clarification on that, because we're better off it being vague. The issue for us is how do we practice? Because I have a diligence project now where the contract doesn't require that, it doesn't bar me from doing it, but the seller's not happy with an LSRP coming on, and it's like, well, tough, but we got to kind of deal with that. But under the new rule, I think you're going to have transactions now going, you're going to deal with labor and finance and all the other issues you do in due diligence. And then the sellers are going to be like, Nobody's putting a borehole in the ground until we have everything tied up in a bow, and then you can come look, because we're just not going to open up that can of worms. So this is a huge shift, you know, in how diligence is going to be done, and we're all out of it. We are out of the diligence game as LSRPs.
So,
We're
but
done.
I guess the comment next week, or this week, Jeff, could be that the way it's phrased right now is just too broad, and the impact will be dramatic. If
Yes.
you're going to start
Yeah.
getting all these calls to the hotline.
Well, that's the other question, if you don't mind me. So what happens when it gets to the hotline? I know this is more of a protocol question. When the hotline gets a call, it's not even clear what happens at that point. Does a case get opened? If it's an offsite point, does it get opened? Once it get, you know, somebody calls in and that creates an affirmative obligation for a property owner or to hire an LSRP. That's ludicrous.
Yeah.
But that could be the comment. Ray and David, and then we'll see if there's other topics. We're more than happy to stay on this one, but I think I get the sense of what the issue is on this one. But David or Ray, let's go with Ray first, and then David.
Yeah, and just a couple points. One, Jeffrey, to your point about you rather not have it clarified, that there are legal obligations and liabilities that you get trapped into. So, you know, I'm always of the mind, I'd rather have it clarified so we know if you're in or out as opposed to otherwise. And this is now all refresh my memory. Mark Peterson pushed for this strongly over 10 years ago, either in the board rules or the ARC rules. And, you know, the Christie administration didn't do that for precisely the reason it would interfere with due diligence, it would interfere with property transfers, it would change everything on its head. You know, obviously that's where we're back at. So, you know, one, yeah, it's vague, but two, I think we should be really concerned that, as you said, no one's going to allow anyone on their property to do any inspection if the obligation is they have to report it. And it just throws everything up into the air, and it's going to have a really chilling effect on property transfer.
Yep, good point. David.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. You know, so I mean, in public meetings and SRAGs, the DEP have expressly said if you see something, smell something, you're supposed to call it in immediately. Anyone, you know, presumably the people in the room are the remediating parties. But the Spill Act never had any reporting limits or threshold quantities. It was no minimum threshold. You know, it was a drop could constitute a discharge. You know, but the thing that gets me is, well, there's two things. One is explicit included boats and planes and pipeline facilities, and it placed the reporting upon the persons who may be subject to liability for the discharge. Okay. You know, and whereas SARA 2.0 expands that to any person. So to think about it in practicality, any party could hire a driller, and the driller, when he pulls up a soil core and it's dripping with oil, can literally drop it there and go and make a call to the department. You know, so there's really no relation to it.
Okay, thank you, David.
So the one thing from outside of the LSRP responsibility is just the construction industry too, right? Where you may have data, you're just managing soil for management offsite, for instance, right? So a lot of that data isn't reflective of site specific in accordance with, you know, field procedure sampling, manual collection. It may be for a facility. And now, for instance, I send soil to Michelle's facility. Now she sees data that also could reflect exceedances, right, from a waste classification purpose. I just want to know where this begins and ends too. And I think it's important. I think if we don't ask the appropriate question, you have to remember, you're going to probably have hundreds of other people asking a similar question in the response to comments, right? So I think just allowing it to lie and leaving it vague sounds great, but somebody I think is going to ask the question anyway.
Right.
In the response. So I think it goes beyond the LSRP obligation. It's the entire community, construction community.
Well, it's like, yeah, it was brought. I appreciate that, Chris, because you can come up with these scenarios, whether it's property transactions or construction site management, where you're coming across information that could be perceived as, you know, a discharge or a violation. You better be calling that in. So it doesn't provide a lot of clarity. It actually confuses matters more. Mr. Tyler.
Anthony, how are you?
Go ahead. How you doing, George?
I might be half asleep, but I was going to raise this the last time this came up. I'm not sure DEP has any legal authority or jurisdiction over any person who's not involved with the property, either as an owner or a discharger. The statute kind of talks to the department's regulation of hazardous substances, but when you get to the parties responsible under the act, it's under the Spill Act and the Brownfields law, it's the discharger or the property owner. So if I'm a buyer and I hire a non-LSRP because they have their own regulatory issues to consider, and the board might have rules that differ from this, where does DEP derive authority to say, hey, you have to make a report? I think that's worth looking into, and maybe someone will just say, I'm just missing something.
Right.
The other thing is there's a question of attorney-client privilege that comes up when an attorney finds out about even a property owner's unlawful act, let's say, whether this rule is going to be going to be construed to attempt to require attorneys to turn in their own clients when there's a discussion of a contract to sell property. So there's that issue. So those are two legal issues I think that comments should explore further. I don't know where it goes. The other thing is, as Jeff mentioned, what happens with that report to the operator on the hotline? I think it's worth, and I think Ray was saying this, it's worth pushing the department hard on the process, because they probably haven't thought it through much. It's like, oh, hey, make a report and we'll figure out the rest later. But who gets the report? What's the reaction? Do they open a case? Do you have to make all the case opening disclosures, take all those initial steps, and et cetera, and force them to deal with it? And the last thing I'd say is, don't they have enough to do without stirring the pot on this one again? But anyway.
No, thank you, George. I mean, look, it's unfortunate that I guess last year during a stakeholder process that these issues were raised, but it doesn't seem like there was any resolution. And here it is, they stuck it in the rule, made it vague. But, duly noted, I think I took some good notes in terms of what the first comment's going to be about, whether it's what you said, George, attorney-client privilege, what happens once it gets called into the hotline. So I'll kind of piece that all together.
Tony, I don't know anything about the stakeholder process, but if it didn't include the banking, insurance, and real estate industries sufficiently on this point, that might be worthy of a comment as well, because both the prior governor and this governor have supposedly mandated a robust stakeholder process.
Right. Yeah.
And I do recall when the Spill Act was first enacted, the bankers, the insurance companies, and the real estate industry paid no attention at all. They thought it was industry, big pharma, chemicals, and the government.
Yeah, you know what, George? I think it's actually in there. I didn't see the bankers, but I'll go back and look.
Anybody with
fair
money.
point.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tony, I think George with a G, raises a good point. However, if you take a look at Sarah, it says person means an individual, public or private corporation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
that doesn't make them liable, though.
Well, okay, but this particular regulation would. So I
Well,
think, quite frank, hang on,
defines-
let me just finish my thought here. So at any rate, I think it's worth a legal fight. That's beyond me. I'm not going to tell Tyler how
Okay.
to practice law. But on the other hand, I
You
think,
always did before.
well, yeah, no, that's because you were my boss. Having said that, I also think Jeff makes a really good point. I'm not so sure we want to define what specific knowledge means, because if you leave it up to me, I have my own criteria. And it means that I need to see quality assured data, so forth and so on, except in those simple cases where you empirically see a gas truck overturned and the gas is spilling out. So that's all I want to say.
No, you know what? Look, you know how this is going to work, right? With the public hearing, it's going to be a one-way street. I don't think we're going to get any clarity on Thursday.
Right.
When probably we won't get clarity until we see the response to comments a few months from now. But I want to move on to other issues because I know the rule package was what, 219 pages. I think we've captured this issue. It's definitely a priority. It's definitely important. Are there other issues that we need to talk about? George, is that still your other hand or?
Oh,
From
that's
before?
me. No, I just don't know how to take it down.
He did that when I used to work for him too.
You know, I think I could put the
There,
hand down.
okay, happy?
Anyway, other issues. Again, I have not read it, so I'm gonna open it up to everybody here. And I would venture to guess a lot of people haven't read it, but if you have, well, there are other issues we want to put on the radar.
I actually have a question. I don't know if,
Okay.
and that is with the wraps, it seems as though unless you meet the certain conditions for the various 5 permits that they outline, you no longer submit an application for, say, just soils. Is that correct? You're submitting, if you have a groundwater issue, vapor issue, you're submitting the one permit for all the issues, all the media.
Tony, I can maybe address this a little bit. This is Kathy Setzer. I'm an LSRP with GEI. I also have been on the remedial action permit technical committee with the DEP for like the last 5 years. I don't know, pre-COVID. We had a meeting this morning and tried to get info, and they're completely tight-lipped. They're not allowed to talk about it at all.
Right.
But to us, what it looks like they're saying, and this I think would be a good thing, is that there's going to be like if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, there's going to be one permit to rule them all. So there's going to be one permit that's like name, rank, serial number, lot and blocks, no specific media designation. And if that's what they're talking about, and then sub permits under it, one for soil, one for groundwater, one for vapor, it'll make modifications much easier if it's just lot and block or address or something like that. It should make mods so much easier. It should make adding additional things easier. Now, we don't know the specifics, and the devil's always in the details. Vapor being a separate permit, I personally think is good because it doesn't really fit where they have. It's a go with soil. Yes, but it's not the soil that's making the vapor problem. It's the groundwater that makes the vapor problem. And a lot of times your vapor is cleaner before the groundwater's clean. So by making them separate, you can drop them off faster, I think, and you don't lose them. But again, devil's in the details.
Hey, Kathy,
Yeah.
it's George with a
Sure.
J.
I don't have my camera on because I look awful.
I am, well, you've never looked awful.
That's sweet.
I worked on the stakeholder group that was heavily involved in re-engineering the RAP program under Gwen Zervis.
Yep.
And quite frankly, it's 52 pages of the 217 pages involve the permit program. And I think I would be very careful not to overly attack that unless there's something really blatant, because I think Gwen Zervis did an incredibly good job in trying to, putting it in words is difficult. I keep telling people, look at the flow diagram. It's a lot more illustrative.
I agree, George. I agree.
And so at any rate, it's very verbose, no doubt about it. But quite frankly, I think if you can get all of the us and thes and the wases and so forth and so on out of it, it's a big improvement. So be careful how you attack it.
Okay, so no real comments around the permits, right? Is what I'm hearing.
Well, I think it's unclear where they're going. I think there's 2 issues. I don't think Kathy was attacking it as much as saying,
Oh, no, not at all. I think it's a good idea.
Right.
We just need more info.
Yeah,
Right.
having one permit with different pieces has validity. How they're going to implement that is a question, and there's also the question about whether or not they're going to expand the universe of exceptions for the expedited soil permits, and where that's going to go, because they're still backlogged. So the new approach to permitting doesn't change their backlog, doesn't change the problem that they have in their review, which is a operations issue at the department.
But the only other thing that bothers me is that Gwen no longer has the permits under her.
Right.
And she's the person who took this on as a mission and did a really good job. Who inherits the program? We'll see what they do with it.
Okay, other,
Hey, Tony, can we find out that? Or they will not know that?
They're not
Can we-
allowed to talk about it. They're not allowed to talk about the rule at all.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
They can't speak to it.
Okay.
I mean, but the comment I could make to what Jeff was just saying is, do we, and look, this is a question, I'm throwing it out there, you know, can we, whatever changes they're proposing, we don't think it's really gonna reduce their backlog, is that fair?
I agree.
I don't think we can say that.
It-
We can ask them, will this help reduce the backlog?
Yeah, I think
And
that-
tell us how.
Right, that's
How?
speculation on your part, Tony, right?
I mean, there's the organization of the permits, and then there's how they're going about reviewing and issuing them. Those are two different things. They're still, if they're doing the same work to issue a different kind of a permit, we're not really getting any traction. We're not really getting any improvement.
Okay.
We're just getting
so
a different framework.
Can I say
But having said that, Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It's
The
okay.
big gripe was that the permit reviewers didn't know what they were doing.
Right.
And that was the hyper focus on the revisions to the process.
Mhm.
And as such, that was where the efforts were being spent trying to make that more objective and accurate.
Anyway, I was gonna say, I guess, Jeff, maybe a comment I can make is we hope that any of the changes to the permit program results in faster, quicker turnaround times and approvals. Right, keep it generic, but get on the record.
Yeah,
To
more
say
accurate
that's
too, Tony, more accurate.
more accurate. David?
Yeah, I just.
More predictable. I'm sorry, David.
Yeah.
More predictable in terms of time frame.
Okay,
Sorry.
The one thing I'll just say is obviously this rule package, it's 4 rules that got affected. And obviously we're very concerned about the administrative rules and the technical rules. The other 2, you know, the ISRA rules had a slight modification, which put an additional requirement for a work plan certified by an LSRP prior to transaction. That wasn't really explicit before, but they put it in there. And the other one is for the unregulated heating oil tanks. The HOTS rule, you know, the old UHOT, UR hot, whatever. And that was really talking about that now residential properties need expressly need a deed notice if they leave residual contamination or the containment of free product. And also, after the remedial action is complete, if there's a groundwater issue, then they have to do a CEA too, which is similar to what we have in the LSRP program. So those are the other 2 rules, which are kind of very minor changes. And obviously they're not the substantive part of what we're concerned with, but they are changes.
thank you, David. Marie?
Sorry, I was on mute. I just want to go back to the remedial action permit business. I do think that the changes, I agree with what Kathy is saying. I think a lot of the changes are really, really positive. But I think a comment to make to the DEP may be with all these, you know, fast tracking all these different categories, most of the permits, like me personally, I haven't had one permit that I've applied for that falls in any of these categories. And we are now waiting over 2 years for permits. So what is the DEP doing to ensure that they're still pushing these permits forward instead of just putting all the permits that don't fall into those categories, putting them to the back of the line?
Okay. Thank you. Kathy, you got another comment on this?
Yeah, it was really just following up on something David just said. David, I haven't read the ISRA section. Are you saying they're just clarifying? I mean, the work plan has always counted for being able to close.
If you look, actually, I can share my screen, but it's like, it's literally, it's 3 lines of text.
Okay, so I mean, they're not changing anything. They're just making sure people understand.
Clearer, yeah. I don't think
Okay,
it's.
yeah.
Yeah, but
Okay,
it was
cool.
kind of interesting. They were explicit about it. That's what some of this stuff, like the spill reporting, is really where something becomes very much more explicit. Which,
Well, that feels very different. I mean, having a work plan count towards an ISRA deal being able to close without a remediation certification isn't new, but maybe it was just not clear before. I don't know.
yeah, that's what I mean. It's, there's nothing else they change. It's only that one section. Yeah, one item in one section.
Thank you. So guess anything else on permits?
Tony, it's Jeff. I do have one or maybe two items under the permits. So I think I agree with most of what has been said. Combining into one permit is okay. Creating new categories of permits, and there are several created, is okay. And I think it's well intentioned. There are, when you look at the remedial action permits, some devils in the details, as Kathy had said. Specifically the VI, the indoor air. I think that there are circumstances where it's going to require, as written, indoor air samples to be collected in order to achieve clean closure. And I also think that there are circumstances where we would not normally collect indoor air samples, and we're going to need to now in order to close the case. I would say, some of those details, and I can send you my comments on that for your use, but some of those details are maybe not where we would head.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff.
I just wanted to make one more comment, and that is that you may have a client that doesn't, like Marie said, does not fall within all the, specifics of each one of those special permits, 1 through 5. And if they don't, you may have a client that would like to get closure on, say, soils because their groundwater is going to take much longer. Will they allow that kind of option? Or is it going to be you are going to have to go with the combined and wait and do it with the groundwater?
That is definitely not the intention. I know that is definitely not the intention.
Okay.
For sure. Like, it's still individual permits per media. Now I'll tell you that the DEP is saying they like to see soil done before groundwater because they're worried about that migration to groundwater pathway, but they're not going to make you get all your media clean before getting a permit. I am certain that is not their intention.
Okay.
All right. Anything else that we haven't covered outside of permits?
But, somebody mentioned to me, and I'm not familiar with it because I didn't get my way through on this, but threatened and endangered species, is that an issue here?
Yeah, it added it into the first section, where it's talking about non-game threatened and endangered species habitats have to be preserved during the course of remediation.
I'm sorry, so what is there a concern with T&E or no?
It's just kind of it makes it a little bit more expressive because there's always that you have to comply with any and all federal, state, local statutes and regulations, but they add the Endangered and Non-Game Species Act into the rules, and then at a couple other spots they kind of get a little bit more explicit about it. Under like general remediation, again, you have to preserve the threatened and endangered species habitats.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you, David.
In their narrative, it's updates better protection of wildlife, and it's pretty voluminous.
Anything else?
Well, my comment, Tony, on the T&E was, I think all LSRPs are going to be taking that into account through the receptor evaluation, if nothing else, right? But I think that the wording of this proposed addition shall document that the remediation will not destroy, jeopardize, or adversely affect the habitat of T&E.
Right.
I think that is a little bit much. I think it's hard to do in a practical sense. And I think also it runs counter to certain land use permits which allow for temporary disturbance of, or in some cases, permanent disturbance of with mitigation a potential habitat. I think they're simple words that are well-intentioned, but may be difficult to implement.
Yeah.
So,
But in their narrative, it says the department has learned that despite language, so forth and so on, that requires persons of conducting remediation shall comply with federal, state permits and so forth and so on. Persons conducting remediation with wildlife. This does not add additional requirements. The proposed language does not create new requirements, but is a reminder of the endangered species.
but I think it does. I think it could.
Well, that's the point. If
yeah.
it does, then it's a disclaimer that's not accurate.
Yeah. There's always that tension when you're working along a coastal waterway, right? Between remediating, capping, and covering, and the use of that area by species. There's always that tension there. And the way the proposed addition is to 726E 1.5, I just think it maybe exacerbates the tension a bit. So.
Thank you, Jeff, George. Anything else that jumps out high level? Again, I should have clarified. Really, my point on Thursday is just to kind of get on the record with some of the high level stuff. And then obviously I'll back it up by saying more details by December 20th. I don't think they're going to give an extension, but I heard that other groups have submitted an extension request. I don't know if anybody has any news on that, but being that button up against the holidays, I can't imagine that they're going to go beyond December 20th.
LSRPA put one in for sure. And I asked Lynn today in our meeting, I said, oh, hey, have you guys granted that extension yet? And she just gave me some bug eyes because she's not allowed to talk about it. And I'm like, all right, I guess not. I'm like, but you received our extension requests. And she's like, we have received a number of extension requests.
Do you know if it was 60 days, Kathy, that you guys asked for?
We asked for 90.
I could find it pretty quickly.
I think we asked for 90.
Was it 90?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks,
wow.
Sonia.
If that
Tony,
would be,
if the trend holds true, they haven't been very generous with extensions. Look at the PAC real roll; it's over 1,000 pages. They gave us what, 3 or 4 days? Whoop-de-doo.
Yeah, 1 week. Yeah, 1 week.
Yeah, I mean that's ridiculous. Usually they would give 30 or 60, but I don't know what's going on. Why?
Yeah, I mean, Mike, you know this, Mike. They're in legacy mode right now, right? With 1 year to go.
Yep.
Yeah, so the longer they take, the more things won't get done by a year from now. Any other? Yes.
Tony, one other thing is there's a general, when I was reading through these, there's a general feeling that they're trying to put into the rule stuff that they're tired of resolving outside of guidance, or trying to push guidance items or clarifications into the rule. Like there's a lot of stuff on alternative fill and about how you can do it, and really goes into the details about how you can do it, which is typically being kind of left in guidance, but they seem to be pushing certain things to emphasize compliance points and in that one. I suppose it's because they've had a lot of problems, or maybe people have been having some mischief with it. But I think that they're trying to push the problematical things into the rule to stop people from having the ability to use judgment on them.
Oh, well, that's a big one, David. So if that's the case, so can we craft a bullet point between now and Thursday?
Yes.
So I can kind of just tee it up about alternate fill.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, we got about 5-10 more minutes before we butt up against the hour here.
The last thing, Tony, is I sent you, and if you want to share it, you can. When Sarah was passed, I went through it kind of per change, citing the changes made, and kind of it's a little bit of shorthand, but it shows exactly what statutes and rules were changed by Sarah and where
Okay, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
If you want to share that, that may just help people navigate what was actually in the rule, sorry, in the act, rather than was, because I'm trying to work through what's in the rule packages and what's expressly not in 2.0, to see what kind of level of, I mean, some of them are going to be housekeeping, some of them are significant, right? But it's it's interesting because, as I said, there was one attorney that I deal with was kind of saying that they have the ability to do their own rule housekeeping, but obviously the spill reporting is a very significant thing, and it's kind of hard to justify it under just housekeeping.
Gotcha. Thank you, David. So anything else before we talk about, I guess, logistics here and next steps? Did we miss anything? And again, I'm sure people are going to be reading the rule at this point. So this is how it's going to work. I guess between now and Thursday, 1 o'clock is when the public hearing is. If you have any high-level thoughts, comments, just email me those issues, and then I'll try to work it into my testimony. And then collectively as a group, and I'm looking at our peer organizations too, let's try to get, I guess, assume that the department's not going to grant any extensions here. So we have till December 20th. We should probably get a draft of everyone's comments circulated, and I'll be more than happy to be the point person on it. So for the LSRPA, for the builders, obviously Mike and Ray, just send me your comments and then I could package them all up, send them out to everybody on this call, but to our EBC folks, just so people can take a look at it. So that would be probably that Friday, December 6th. I think that is a Friday, right? December 6th. Yeah. So maybe if you can get me, and that's only what, 2.5 weeks away.
Yeah, it's not long. Mark
not
Fisher and
long.
I are coordinating for LSRPA. Tony, we'll do what we can. I don't know where we're going to be by the 6th.
Yeah. Yeah, or if not, I mean, even by I guess the week later, right, December 13th, and then I could at least share a draft with everybody before we go ahead and finalize it.
And one thing that we've talked about is, as the association, some of these topics we have to be a little more sensitive to coming from LSRPs. We don't want to ever give the appearance that we're suggesting we don't think discharges should be reported. So it's a bad look for us. So we may get some comments that we like, but probably aren't appropriate for us to submit, but may give them to you for consideration.
Sure.
There's a lot of valid perspectives on this matter, but our association is uniquely positioned that we don't want to look like we're advocating for being less protective. Now, we may advocate for some more clarity on what in the world they're talking about, but we do have to be careful in that respect.
No, I appreciate that, Kathy. Yep, that makes sense. Any other closing comments? If not, I'll look for your email before Thursday, and then I guess we'll start working on some written comments, all with the anticipation of sending something in mid-December. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye, guys.
Happy
Happy
holidays.
Thanksgiving.
We appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.